Hello. Thank you so much for watching. I am a teacher for a public school in Texas, and I have all this stuff that I've created over the years that's just sitting in my Google Drive. And since we're in the coronavirus shutdown, I am just here um, uploading stuff that I have for anyone who cares, or anyone who's interested, or anyone who's wide awake at 3 in the morning and doesn't know what to do. But I thought I've always wanted to just share all this information. I've also put my socials on here. I'm a teacher. I love talking to teachers. I love connecting with any teachers out there. And so if you want to connect with me, the YouTube channel has an Instagram account called Talking to Teachers, and that is because I do intend to start uploading podcasts, which I'm currently creating and I'm super excited about, and I want to upload them hopefully by the end of this month. And there's 5 of them so far, and all it is just me sitting down with teachers and talking with them. And then my personal Instagram, if you want to follow me, is at simplymq, and then my LinkedIn account and my professional profile. And I would love to build a community of teachers from all across the nation, all across the country, or that's the same thing, all across the world, that we could really begin to share out ideas, and I think that would be super cool. So let's go ahead and begin. This is a PowerPoint that I created a few years ago after being a new teacher. The following year, I had scored quite well. I had done quite well that previous year, and so they asked me to start creating tools that maybe they could share out to new teachers. Just any tips. My greatest tip is that I got to know my principal really well, and she was amazing. She was inspiring, and most importantly, she took me under her wing. Because like all new teachers, you don't really know anything, and you can make a lot of mistakes along the way. So I had made several mistakes, and she quickly realized that she had to make me relearn a few things. And I'm just so grateful for that relationship. At the end of that first year, actually, she had put several people on a growth plan just to kind of help them grow. And if you've been teaching for a while, you know that can be kind of dicey. And so I asked her, why didn't I end up on a growth plan? I had several mistakes throughout the year. And she said, because every day you would come to my office and talk to me. And you had an open relationship with me. And anytime she came to my room to observe me, at the end of the day, the first thing I did was go to her room and say, okay, what'd you think? What did you want me to fix? And she said that really saved her from having to force me to change. And I think that that's something I really want to put out there for new teachers. Create a friendship with your principal. Don't be afraid of them. It's not like an office setting where like the boss is in the office and you vaguely get to know them. Be in their office, sit down, talk with them, stop by at the end of the day, say, how's things going? How have you been? And really just use that time to create that relationship with them. So without further ado, let's get started. So these are just some quick things that I learned. If you've been teaching for a while, I would love for you to put any comments you have at the bottom for teachers of things that you think would work better. But for me, these are just things that I found. The first is that continuity is key in teaching, and it's going to be different for you and everyone else. And it's something that your first, I would say 3 to 5 years, you're honing in on. Every year, something's going to work better for you. And as you change one thing, it's going to affect, like a domino effect, something else. So I would kind of keep both of those things in mind. But what you really want to start narrowing in on is a difference between your content, which is the subjects you're teaching, and the way you teach. I have moved several subjects. I'm a generalist, and so in August I'll find out what opening there is, and then they'll move me there. And so I've gone from English to social studies, middle school social studies, back to English. And I know that sounds like, okay, well, that's 2 subjects, but when you switch grade levels, the whole thing changes, which we call preps, right? Your prep. And so having said that, even though I switched content and then I switched preps, so 6th grade English versus 7th grade English versus 8th grade social studies, 5th grade social studies, I have been able to realize that I taught the same. My classroom was conducted exactly the same, and that is because it was the way my classroom was conducted that worked for me. And so regardless of the content I went into, I kept those procedures in place. And those procedures have nothing to do with content. It's how kids walk in your room, how they get their materials, how they sit down at their desk, how they ask you questions, how they get up to sharpen a pen or pencil, whether you use pen or pencils. When I moved to the middle school, I banned all pencils. And all middle school kids love pens anyways. I don't know why. Except for last year, I had a lot of kids who really hated my pen rule. But for me, I don't mind kids crossing things out. I teach them. This is another thing. I teach them how to scribble out information as opposed to drawing out a whole pen, trying to X something out on their page. I'll show them just draw a line through it and move on. And so you have to teach them everything. But those are things that are contentless. So it doesn't matter what you're teaching. These are the things that you want to start thinking about. So when it comes to planning, it's exactly the same. Planning is the best way to be successful in teaching. It's all about what you do ahead of time. I always say everything that happens between 8 o'clock and 3 o'clock or 7 o'clock and 4 o'clock, whatever you teach, whatever your hours are, all of that is just a reflection of your job. Your job is actually outside of the school day. It's everything you do once the students leave and before the students get there in the morning. And all of that comes down to effective planning, because you can sit for hours and stare at something and never really come out with a concrete plan. So really keep that in mind. So you really want to make sure that you start to your first year, don't look at what you're planning, look at how you're doing it. So it's not about, oh man, I put together a great lesson yesterday. It's, you know what? I was able to sit by myself on a Tuesday night and really get things done. And maybe Tuesday nights are your thing. That's the night that everyone in your family leaves you alone. And that's the night that you feel mentally aware and cognitive. And so you want to start paying attention to those types of things so that as you grow from year to year, you start to build to yourself in a more effective plan. So here we go. Have a weekly plan. So you want to think of things in a Monday through Friday setting. Now, my first year teaching, I made the mistake of thinking that teaching happened on a Monday through Friday. So like we would start a lesson on Monday and then we would end it on Friday. Like that was the way we did things, Monday through Friday, but that was not really the best way to do things. Sometimes there's a holiday on a Monday and then school doesn't start till Tuesday and it's a 4-day week. Some days, if you teach at the middle school, high school levels, you have all sorts of extracurricular activities and you never know who's in your class because kids belong to different things. And so one day all your band kids are gone, next day theater kids, next day athletics. And so because of that, teaching happens on a number basis. So you need 6 days to teach a concept, and then you say, oh, we're starting this on a Wednesday, and we're doing 6 days after that. So don't get caught up in the Monday through Friday for teaching. But on a weekly basis, there are things you are going to have to do. And so that's what you really want to say is, I'm going to create the same system that I'm going to use every week. So Monday, I'm going to do this. Tuesday, I'm going to do this, so on and so forth, because everything should look the same. And it's going to be hard for you to figure out what you're going to do because you're learning. But you're going to begin to see that on a weekly basis, certain expectations are happening for you. And those are the things that you want to put in place. So I gave you some ideas down here from parent contact. Think about a day that works for you where you could sit down and call parents. RTI in Texas, we use a system called RTI. I'm not sure if that's national or global. And basically, this is where we have students that we have identified who are struggling, and we have to put them into a system with what we're doing from week to week for so many weeks. And it's a way to figure out what works for that child, or if that child needs to be tested further for like special ed or to receive certain accommodations. And it's a huge process to get done. It's quite daunting. Lesson planning, finding materials. Supplements means materials outside of your main curriculum that you're going to use to make sure that you can enhance your lesson. Intervention planning. So when are you going to do small groups so that you can bring people to your table and do private tutoring with them? Something as basic as making copies. Making copies is like the number one thing in education, and it's crazy. There should be a whole class on it because we should, before you get your bachelor's degree, you should have to take a class on how to fix a copier because that is a weekly process. And I don't know how many times I go to the copier machine and I have to be the one to unjam it, and I have to realize it has no paper and then run to the office, and then you put the paper and you realize there's no ink, then you run back to the office and you put the ink and you realize there's no staples. So that's a day in itself to plan. Anything from planning your common assessments. Common assessments are tests that you and your grade level have decided to give the students, or you and your school have decided to give, but they are not as big as a district level test. They are something that it's allowing you to see where you're at. So you can take a look at this list. I'm violating all sorts of PowerPoint rules here by reading everything to you, but my point is, you have a lot of expectations on a weekly basis. And if you say, this is what my Mondays are, this is what my Tuesdays are, Thursdays and Fridays, Wednesdays, you figure out what works best for you, write those things down, and then every week try to stick with them. And you know what? It's going to be a wreck at first. And you're going to slowly adjust and fix. Some things are going to be unreasonable. You're going to say, I'm going to do it another day. But you really want to start to nail down for you personally what works best, because that's going to be the most important. Okay, what you need is a plan. Okay, so I just kind of threw this up there very quickly, but let me just say, When it comes to teaching, the biggest struggle is planning. And you really need to set out a time for that. Everything else will fall into place. If you plan how your students are going to walk in the room, how they're going to sit at their desk, what the inside of their desk is going to look like, where they're going to get materials in your room, how students are going to ask questions, all of these very mundane little things. And it's always funny because when you talk to a new teacher, they're always like, yeah, nah, I'm not going to, I just need, the first day, the first period, and I'm going to explain all my rules. And then Tuesday, on the second day of school, we are starting class. And if you've been teaching for a while, you're like, absolutely not. That's totally insane. You are going to go all 5 days. You are going to practice your rules. You are going to drill those rules. You are going to make sure that they know exactly what they expect when they come into your room. And then the rest of the year, you don't have to address them as much. And so that's something that I think is a big deal. Okay. Now, it's important to know I did this as a live presentation, so I threw little funny things in here, but one of them that's like always annoying is when the presenter's like, and I'm going to give you the definition, but I just did that to be funny. But the truth is, it's just really important that we look at the word format. So I kept saying the word plan, but plan to me sounded like it had a lot of very exact pieces, like this is going to be your unit 1, lesson 1, where you're going to go and look at specific things. So I started to swap it out for the word format. Regardless of what unit you're in, regardless of what lesson you're in, regardless of what content you teach, every week you want a format that you follow. And this is something that is even true in your personal life. And on LinkedIn, I actually wrote an article for online students. I got my master's degree through Capella Online, and I had to figure out a format for myself. And as an online student, you read about some kids people who start online school and then they end up dropping it because it's just crazy and they can't really get ahead of it. But it's because from week to week, they made every class different. Like, this is a brand new class, this is a brand new professor, this is brand new types of homework. Instead of saying on Monday I do this, Tuesday I do this. So really figuring out a format is an amazing way to get things done. Here is my weekly format. Does not have to be your format. It can totally change. It's just about giving you a suggestion. So you want to think big picture, and that is what must be completed when. So certain things have to be done daily. Anything from like write-ups are going to be a daily something. I think on a daily basis, there are little things that they're going to always ask you to turn in. Attendance during class, believe it or not. I know if you haven't taught yet, you're like, attendance is like, I'll just take that, but it's a nightmare. I was one of those teachers that every day they're buzzing into my room telling me to get my attendance done. So really setting up cell phone alarm clocks for yourself. I should bring my cell phone up and show you. I have tons of alarms going off all day, and I have now, like, the kids basically will wrestle me down and make me take my attendance because I am so tempted to just blow past it because we're doing so much work. So really figuring out ways to be successful. And so some of the things that I think I just want you to really think about is what are you going to complete daily? What do you need to complete weekly? And what is important versus what is perfunctory? What is going to be something you just need to get done, but it's not at a high level of performance. It's not going to matter as much. So let me say on a weekly basis, lesson plans are due. Lesson plans drive educators crazy. The more you teach, the more you know what you're doing. You could walk into a room tomorrow and see something on the board and teach a 50-minute lesson and run out of time because you've been teaching so long. When you're a newer teacher, I know you really live and die by lesson plans, but you really want to make sure that you really are thinking a week or two in advance. And so how do you do that? By really having a set schedule, something that you have in place. And within that, and I think I get into this later on, you really want something that you are going to then have a set routine for lesson planning. What do you take to your lesson planning station? So where do you go to lesson plan? I go to a local coffee shop here in the city, and I'll sit down there for hours, and people probably hate me because I have a table full of stuff and they're like, you're by yourself, you should be in the corner, but I mean, it's my thing that works for me. Get away from people, get away from the TV, because it'll be very tempting to kind of not really think things through. And so you want to create a place for you that's cozy, that's comfortable, and then you want to create a bag that you take with you, which is your lesson planning bag, and it'll have everything in it you need. That is going to be an example of a weekly expectation that is very important. You can go to some schools where they live or die by that. You can get written up if you don't have it turned in Sunday night at midnight. You can go to other schools where they're not going to ask for it for 3 months, and then all of a sudden one day they pop in your room to see your lesson plans, and you're like, oh my gosh. So you don't want to end up in that situation. I've been in that situation. It's almost better to have someone that's writing you about lesson plans than doing the random drop-ins, because by law you have to have them. And if you don't have someone who's on your back and you just fall behind on them, you're going to end up in a lot of trouble. So it's really important to say, when will I do this and when will it work for me? I know teachers who say they'll sit down and watch like their favorite TV show and lesson plan that night of the week. I'm not that person. I have to give my 100% energy to things. So if I'm watching something, I'm not doing anything else. But if you are a multitasker and you can sit down and that is a way for you to focus, then I say by all means, that works for you. But it's just about figuring out whatever works for you. The other thing is putting first things first, which, that's the 7 Habits school thing, because we were a big 7 Habits school. But when you're talking about putting things first, really prioritize what is important over all the expectations. As a teacher, your expectations are endless. You're just going to be going down the list of things to get done. And if you never prioritize important information versus just things you need to get done, you're constantly going to be frustrated because it's a busy world. And frankly, you're not going to accomplish everything. No one ever does. And so you have to start saying to yourself whenever you receive all your expectations on a weekly basis, and it depends how your principal does it. For me, I've had principals. My current principal has something called Things to Remember. So on Sunday afternoon, she'll send out an email and it has just a list of bullet points, which is super helpful because we just literally have to accomplish every bullet point throughout the week, which sometimes there's like 20 bullet points, sometimes there's 3. But there's a lot going on. And so you have to say, I'm not just going to go in chronological order of bullet points here. There are some things that are more pressing than others. Then I've had other principals. One principal had a blog and we would go to her blog. I found that less effective because it was one more step, right? And if you're on your cell phone and blogs are not like user friendly on cell phones, especially back at that time period, then it was something you didn't access all the time. I had another principal who would just say it all at the faculty meeting, and so you were the one writing it down. And the problem with that is that you were the one... Oh, hold on. Sorry, I have some noisy people outside. I don't know if you can hear them. But I really found myself in a place where there were a lot of papers that were being written out with like all these things we had to get done, because she would only talk in staff meetings about the next week's expectations, and then you would throw that paper in your bag or in the backseat of your car and it was gone for good. So if you are bold enough and you have a great relationship with your principal, I would definitely suggest to them a weekly email bullet point style, because it's about effectiveness. And one thing about education is it can lean a little ineffective, right? Our ability to plan, our ability to strategize. And so I would say, if you could say, listen, bullet point emails are amazing. It's a great way to get that done. Anyways, on to this. So here's kind of my set schedule. On Monday, I'll make parent contacts. That's because, I could make a joke like on Fridays, you tend to be short-tempered and, parents call upset on Mondays for something you said. You can start prepping the week's lesson. So Monday morning is a great time to walk in and refresh yourself. Of course, you've already had the whole week planned, but it's a great time to like go in and say, okay, this is when, I'm going to do this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Make sure your materials are all set up. Make sure you have everything going. District school initiatives are usually things that they want us to do. They're random things you're going to have. Like one week we had to print out our alma mater and staple it to the top of our door with a favorite quote from a president. Random things that are just kind of like nominal things. So, save 5 to 10 minutes for that. You're going to have a lot of those, especially the younger you go. You teach elementary, you're going to have the Dr. Seuss Day, the 100th day of school. You're going to have like themed months. Middle school and high school, there's things like Spirit Week, Drug-Free Week, but I don't think there's as many the higher up you go. And then I have older teachers at the secondary level now who are like, I'm not doing any of that. So it depends on the years you've taught and the grade level you teach. But if you teach elementary, expect to have a lot of those days where you're just doing nominal tasks. Tuesday is when we really focused on content planning, content lesson planning for the following week. And so this is the day we said to ourselves, like, okay, we have to start thinking about next week and what we're going to do. Now, this is interesting because you can overplan. And as a teacher, sometimes, especially earlier on, 45 minutes sounds like a lot of time. And 90 minutes sounds like a lot of time. I have taught elementary where I had a whole day, 90 minutes and 45 minutes at the secondary level, and you never have enough time. And so someone once told me, take everything you've planned and then that's 1 day's worth of work, and cut it in half, and that's what you're actually going to do. And I think that's a great little tidbit, because you can really overplan. And so making sure you're conscientious. And there's 2 ways this is really helpful. The first is that it forces you to get done what you need to get done. So when I start school on Monday, I know what I'm doing all the way to Friday. I know what worksheets we're doing. I know the lessons that I'm teaching, what videos we're watching, everything that we're doing. Now, having said that, that might be dependent on a lot of different things that are going to happen, but it also tells me the speed at which I'm teaching, right? And so if I see I have all this stuff to get done, then I think it even kills a lot of the downtime, which leads to behavior problems, because you're like, hey guys, come on, let's go finish this up. I got to get to the next thing. You're taking forever. And that kind of is a driving force behind you really moving your class along and limiting the amount of downtime and free time that they have. I'd never understood classes where they have like 5 minutes at the end of class, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like the bell, every single day the bell rings and I'm like, what? Oh my God, no. And so that's because when you have an effective lesson plan in place, you are busy. And the days, if you talk to anyone who's been teaching for a long time, the worst days for teachers are free days. It's the day we hate the most. And the reason why we hate them the most is because kids get in trouble. Like, you would think that you would say, hey, you guys, whatever, you have 45 minutes to do whatever you want. Get onto a Chromebook, play video games, watch this movie like the day before Christmas, and I'm going to be doing grades and getting everything else done. And it's not like that. They get in trouble. They want to talk to you about what you're doing, what your plans are. Why are they just sitting there? They're bored. And so really having an effective lesson plan in place kills all of these types of things. There are days that I've just taught before a break for no other reason than I'm like, no, they're just going to sit there and complain the whole period. So keep that in mind. Then you want a day where you are going to do effective tasks. So Wednesdays we'll make copies. We will prepare, like if we're going to do small group weeks where we do like I'm going to teach a tutoring lesson to like 5 kids during class, and then other kids are going to go and work in groups separately, preparing all those things in advance. And then Thursday we had our faculty meeting. So Thursday we had not our faculty meeting. After school you have faculty meetings. That's with the whole staff. But you have something called content meetings and PLCs. And both of those are just where your whole content gets together. So like if you're teaching English, all English teachers get together. And you kind of go through some things. You'll have a lead on the campus, and that lead will be in charge of bringing back any information from the district and kind of some things that they need, but also bringing back like other things upon that. Oops, my bad. All right. So write down a Monday through Friday schedule. So if you're a new teacher right now, this is something you might want to pause right here, and I want you to write down anything that you need to do, and you want to make sure the goal is attainable, especially when you're younger. But I think everyone in life always talks about what they want to get done, and that's why there's that idiom, when all is said and done, more is said than done. That is true for teachers. And so I mean, I've worked with the top teachers on things and had issues where we way overplanned something, and then I've had times where I've sat down with some of the biggest leaders around, and yet we really struggled to plan something effective as opposed to something that was hopeful. And I think because teachers really do have passion and they really do care, they end up overselling a lot of their possibilities. So you want to make sure to really bring that down so that you don't do that. Okay. So using format. So remember, a format for me is going to be different than having just a plan. Format talks about this is where this goes. So right here is going to be the lesson. Right here is going to be the work. Right here is going to be the activity. And so each week when you plan a lesson, you're just dropping in information. You're not there creating. Creating's not part of it anymore. You're just dropping in information. And so you don't want to be reinventing the wheel every week. You want a strong lesson plan format that you have, and your district should provide you one. If not, there are many online. I'll even show you. I actually just created mine on a spreadsheet on Google Drive. I'm a huge Google Drive fan for teaching because it saves everything from year to year. But and then I'll just have just different things in place, and you plug in. It makes it so much easier. So okay, all this stuff you can just read by yourself, but it basically just says that each week, of course, what you put in is going to change, but you want a good, solid, structured format that can be in place Ah ha ha. Let me go. This is my, oh no, dang it. That's my, let me go to my school here. Oh, no, my bad. Oh, no. See, I don't know what's going on. Here we go. Lesson plans. So let me show you this. This is my lesson plans for the week. All right. So I'm going to just go to a random week that we can start doing. And you can see just kind of what I did. So I created on the side everything we had to get done. So the date, the week. We teach reading, but we were trying to support writing because next year the 7th graders take reading and writing. So this is something that allows them, so they would give us rules that they wanted us to teach the kids. So each week we would plan a rule ahead of time that we were going to emphasize. What the title of my unit was, in Texas we call our lesson expectations TEKs. And so it told us what our TEK was, how we were going to write it on the board. And this is shared with my whole team so that we all had the same thing on the board. My administrator was a big stickler that there was continuity. Some districts allow a little more autonomous type behavior, which I'm all for in the classroom, but we didn't have that this year. For in Texas, we have a different format. We have to do something called listening, speaking, reading, writing. You'll probably see that a lot everywhere now. It's like the new thing, and it talks about what you have to do in the classroom. You have to do all 4 of those daily. And so then what's the mentor text, the main text we're going to use, what skills, and then what we're doing each day. We even planned YouTube videos. Every week that happens. Every week we have that in place. And so then we're just dropping in information. So create a strong structure with your grade level. And then each week you guys are just plugging in information. You're not starting over again, recreating a brand new lesson plan. You're just going in and putting in place what's there, and then save them from week to week because you're going to be there next year. So here's kind of something we came up with. This is back when I was teaching elementary. So we had grammar rules, and so we would practice them. Mondays would be 1 and 2, Tuesdays would be 3 and 4, and then Wednesdays we would write sentences to the rules of 1 and 2. Thursdays we would create sentences 2, 3, and 4, applying the rules, and then Friday we had an assessment. And so sounds super short and quick, but of course, you know, as a teacher, that right there could take all day. All right, so think about the contents you teach, and then what are the must for every lesson? Okay, what are the must? So traditionally, you're gonna have the hook, something to interest them. This is not something where you're going to think, oh, a hook Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Your hook is day 1 of your lesson. I should even change that from Monday through Friday to day 1 to day 12. Maybe the end of your lesson is 12 days away. So day 1 is your hook day. That's the day you're going to spend. I always start with YouTube videos. I always engage them right away with like little comedy sketches on YouTube. There's so many great things on YouTube that you can use, from vocabulary to common lit resources. There's so many things that are in there. But you want to say, okay, so day 1 of my lesson is introductory, and it's all about getting kids to familiarize themselves with what the material is. Day 2 might be an introduction to vocabulary. And so no matter what you're teaching, even though you're going to change units and lessons throughout the year, every lesson is going to follow the same cycle. And I'm going to tell you, students start to learn it. Even if you start saying, okay, guys, we're in day 1, you know what that means. We're starting off with YouTube videos. We're doing introductions. Okay, guys, we're in day 2, which means we are now entering vocabulary. And so you really start to hone your kids into that schedule. They start to know it. So they know going in that day what they're supposed to be doing. And after they do it once, 2, maybe 3 times, they're all about it. They're like, oh yeah, today's day 3. We're going to have a vocabulary quiz over the stuff we were introduced yesterday. And so not only are you now not stressing out about, oh my God, what do I do today? Like you're trying to scratch up all this information, that you can use, but as differently, you now are in a place where your kids know what you do, you know what you do. And so when it comes to actually being a part of a lesson, students are not struggling to figure out what's important and what's not important. It's as if you've built these pillars in place and they are being used by the kids as a barometer of where they're at in the lesson and how much they understand. So you really want to make sure that that stays the same. All right, so This is a book I reference all the time. I'm going to link it down below. It's called Teach Like a Champion. It was one of the greatest books. It was actually, my district did I'm so OCD. I had to make sure both lines were covered behind the screen. Anyway, I was introduced to the book Teach Like a Champion. My district does a book club thing every once in a while. And I actually really committed to this book because I was a first-year teacher, and it really was awesome and changed my life. So I highly recommend you go and get it. But here's a quote from it. He says, "When I started teaching, I would ask myself while I planned, what am I going to do tomorrow? The question revealed the flaws in my planning method in at least two critical ways. The first flaw is that I was thinking about an activity on the following day. The second was that I was asking the night before class." So this is a really good way to think about a common mistake for teachers, and this is what I did even my first year teaching. When you think of planning, you think that you're sitting down and you're planning, what am I doing tomorrow? So, okay, you know what, tomorrow I'll do a vocabulary lesson and then I'll do this, but that's the incorrect way to plan. You want to plan all 12 days of a unit at once. That's why lesson planning changes. It's not like so daunting when you think about lesson planning. If you think you're planning day to day, you're like, oh my God, every day I'm going to take 2 hours to sit down at the dining room table and do this. But when you realize lesson planning is actually something that takes, so you have 12 days of lesson plans that you do all at once. And you sit down in a grid model and you say, okay, on day 12, these are all the expectations they have to have on the test. And then you say, so what do they need on day 11? And you work your way backwards. When you walk into your class, you shouldn't be able to say, this is what I'm doing tomorrow. You should be able to say, this is what I'm doing for the next 2 weeks. So it's a really important change or shift that you want to keep in mind. So when you're using formats for planning, here's kind of something. I did do a Monday through Friday here, but now know that I did switch from a Monday through Friday to a day one to day whatever the end of your lesson is. And your district is going to provide you with the days and the testing. That's called a scope and sequence. So they're going to say, this is the unit you're doing, and on day 12 or 12 days after teaching this unit, your kid should be ready to take this test. And these are all the expectations. So I want to kind of go through, everyone knows Bloom's taxonomy. It's like the most obvious thing in education right now. But I kind of I was taught almost incorrectly, and I think a lot of people go through this, and that is that every day your students should be creating and evaluating. So for those who don't, I apologize if you know teaching already, but for those who are barely getting started, Bloom's taxonomy is this idea that these are the lowest levels of learning. So remembering something is the lowest level of learning. Knowing that the Declaration of Independence is July 4th, 1776 is not helpful. It doesn't do anything for you. But being able to create a document where you have to recreate the same emotion that the founding fathers felt when they wrote, they wrote their statement to King George is way more valuable, because now you're looking at what issues were involved. So that's just a change. The way you truly understand something is when you call create and evaluate. So when students are expected to create and evaluate something, it's like the best way for them to do something. Having said that, you do not always live up here. I need to put a little line right here that says rigor. That's kind of the idea, actually, is that rigor it increases, which is new. When I started teaching, which is only, I'm barely 7 years in, but my first year teaching, I was always told, oh, everything's create and evaluate. Everything's create and evaluate. Well, that's not true. First, kids have to be introduced. So this is the way a lesson works. Day one of a lesson is down here. You're at the bottom of the staircase. And the goal is, with no matter how many days you have to teach something, you have to be at assessment ready level by the time that unit comes to an end. So if you have 5 days to teach something, and they're going to vary based on how hard each task is. So like, for example, teaching expository informational reading is probably one of the easiest readings to teach. And I just posted a video about it for anyone who's starting to teach reading. That would be maybe a 12-day lesson. So down here's day one, where you introduce all of the things about it, and you want them to remember the vocabulary. That's the goal, right? Then you want them to really understand the vocabulary. Then you're going to practice applying the vocabulary. Then you're going to actually read an article and you're going to analyze all the things that they've learned so far in it. And then you're going to help them evaluate their learning. So they're going to start to question whether they believe the author. Then they're going to create their own. So then once we take this test, and your students, provided they did well, and you don't have to go back and reteach, which I'll do a whole video on data. But then you start back all the way at the bottom with the next unit. You're back to day one again. So you kind of want to understand lesson planning as this staircase. So every week you're saying, okay, day one, my remember, understand day, I'm doing introduction into whatever you're about to learn with high engagement, YouTube videos, games, whatever you want to use. And then the next day for introduction week might be all about introducing vocabulary. So some retention games, something to help them to remember it. But just remember that each week you're going from bottom to top. And I keep saying each week, but that's so incorrect. Once you're actually in an education system, you realize weeks are totally crazy. And they're really at the behest of what's happening. I mean, this COVID shutdown right now is a great example of that, because if you look at what we're at right now, I mean, this is, the idea that you're going to have a Monday through Friday system just is not really something to plan apart. So I would say, instead of using days, always call them by numbers: day one, day two, day three. So whenever we have like a 16-day unit, we'll be like, oh, we're on day 8, we're on day 9. And that's kind of a better way to measure it, even with the students, because you can tell them, yeah, guys, we have 16 days for this unit. On day 16, you're taking the test. And so it really allows them to know where they're at. But for you, I think that's something that's not really well conveyed to teachers, is that you start down at the bottom and you work your way up every week, every unit, I should say. So keep that in mind. All right. Now that you've created your professional schedule, you should have a day you plan to meet with your content and plan for the following week. Okay, so I simply explaining everything I explained up there. I apologize. I'm reading this along with you. I just happened to find these and I thought I wanted to post them. But it's basically saying what I already said. Each time you start a new unit, you're starting at the bottom of the staircase and you're going up. Okay, so for this might be geared towards Texas teachers, but I can change the language to fit everyone, and that is simple. And it's you want to have, I have like this random blue bag that, I don't know, my mom bought a suitcase and it was thrown inside there. And so it's just my lesson plan bag. And every week, I literally have commandeered one of the student Chromebooks that's not being used and charger and thrown it in there so that I'm not unplugging my laptop every week, because I think that is like the worst thing in the world when I have to unplug all my wires. So I just take a Chromebook and a charger. It's sitting in there. Everything I do is on Google Drive anyway, so I don't need any actual computer. It's not like there's documents on a computer I need. I would say my biggest advice is put everything in the cloud. One time I was at Starbucks working on my last class for my master's degree. I got a phone call and I stepped outside, which is like totally common practice at Starbucks. And the guy next to me grabbed my laptop, my backpack, everything, stole it all. It was a nightmare. So, but I had used Google Drive for everything. And so thank God I didn't lose a single thing, except for thousands of pictures I had on the computer of my grandmother, who's now passed away. Well, thousands of pictures plus pictures that I had with my grandmother right before she had passed. And so devastating. But now I, like everyone else in the 21st century, realizes the cloud is honestly the safest way to go. So what we call our TEKs, which is, they basically are the set of rules that you teach kids each unit, whatever the state says. So in the state of Texas, they say that students have to be able to identify the format for facts in an article. So is it cause and effect, compare and contrast, sequence of events? So when you need the list of state expectations for your students, have a copy of it, have it laminated, have it taped to a binder, something in there. You always want that in there. You want to commit those to memory, but you want them in there as a reference as well. Your pacing guide. So a pacing guide is your district's plan. You don't plan out your schedule. The district is going to give you the units you're going to follow and the days that they are going to create tests and give those. And those tests are a big deal. There's nothing more heartbreaking, and it will happen to you and you will survive, but there's nothing more heartbreaking than pouring your heart out, teaching as hard as you can, and then all the kids fail. And it's a great place to start. It's like lesson 1 in learning that engagement is not everything. And I think that early on in teaching, everything you do is games and fun and rapport. But, in a podcast that I have coming out in a couple weeks, we talk a lot about that, how that kind of becomes probably the biggest hurdle for teachers is to realize what effective academic engagement looks like as opposed to just fun. So your TE, that means your teacher editions. This is probably a dated statement. I don't even use teacher editions anymore because everything's online. Used to be when you had textbooks, you got your teacher textbook was in there. Okay, then anything that's your possible supplement materials. Today, how funny, this is not paper books anymore. These are now websites. But there's a lot of great websites out there. Common Lit is an amazing company. I actually had almost gotten a job with them. But anyway, so a heartbreaking moment in my life. But when we go to sit down to plan, I do have a handful of companies that are online that we will go to try to pull in extra worksheets, extra little presentations, anything that you want like that. I've already mentioned, try to find something extra that's outside of like your regular classroom used one. And this way you don't have to always remember to unplug it. Otherwise, what happens is I'll get lazy, especially on a Thursday for faculty meetings. And I'm like, nah, I'm not unplugging it. And I'll just remember everything they say. And of course, you don't remember anything. I still use a paper calendar. I think that that's like a very important thing. And I really want to keep that in mind, that a paper calendar, it's still a great way for you to write out materials. So I would highly recommend having a paper calendar is like a great way to have a visualization on your desk. Anyway, during this whole time we've been working from home, I really have gotten a good use of Google Calendar. And so I would say if you really want to, and I'm trying to teach myself to use the online Google Calendar and reminders format, which I think is great, but there was something nice about having on your desk a paper calendar that you could reference quickly. We would even print out our lesson plans after we type them up and just have them out on the desk. It's just a quick fix for whether there's internet issues, an admin walks in a room to see what's going on, all sorts of things like that. So paper calendars, I'd say yes. If you're super techie or younger than 30 and you depend on online formats only, Google Calendar is a great calendar to use as well. I'm a huge Google teacher. On another one that I was saying is the state test. So I know that this is different because I have cousins who teach in other states, and they are like, it's not as dependent, but you should have some sort of test that you're going to be held accountable to from year to year. Or if you really want to be a great teacher, you should, at least if you're not in a content that does that. For Texas, social studies and science only have certain grade levels that test, but you don't test every year. So if you want to really hold yourself accountable, find a test that you're going to use. But most people have a state test. And I would keep all the year's copies of that state test in a binder and their answer keys, and so that you can reference them. Because at the end of the day, my first principal said one of the most amazing things to me, and she said, you have to meet the obstacle they're given. So yes, you can teach a great lesson about poetry, or you could teach a great lesson about some content here and all the things that you believe, and maybe because you come from college and your mind's way up here. But if the state tests it a certain way, the kids need to practice it that way, because there's nothing worse than them failing a question that they absolutely know the answer to because you failed to teach them the correct way to do it. And I know that that's kind of controversial because we're like, hey, not in today's world. Like, you need to be allowing students to work to the best of their ability and not focusing on teaching to a task. But when you're an educator, you're in a system. That's all I can say to that. And so when you're in a system, you got to play the game. And part of that is you need to make sure that your kids are ready to meet the expectation where it is. One of the things that I've always said that I was told early on is that your job is not to think big picture. The state pays millions of dollars. I used to work for a research company that built standardized tests. And the state, they do the research. They figure out what the expectations need to be based on companies' responses to like what their workers need to be proficient in their job. And then they build these standards down. So you're only worried about your grade level. And usually the way a test is built is the way the state has found is most effective later in that student's life. So really use those as guides to make sure that you're planning correctly. So a great one here that I'm trying to think of is when we talk about, oh man, then my brain goes blank. That's just how it goes. See, I didn't have a plan in place. Now I'm failing. But I would say that for us, one of the ones that we kind of came across a lot was when we were teaching drama, and the way they have to understand stage directions. And it was like we taught them these very emotional levels for stage directions, like, then they storm off to the side. And we were like, well, they stormed off because they were mad, because they were angry, blah, blah, blah. And then the test was like, well, it was most effective for them to storm off stage so that they would have exited the scene. So you kind of want to keep a lot of that in place. All right, so you definitely are going to think about rigor a lot. Here's that Bloom's taxonomy. Again, you're going to see it 1,000 different ways. There's even images online now where they have apps that you can download, and the apps are organized by taxonomy, by Bloom's taxonomy. So high rigor apps, low rigor apps. And remember, you're going through these things constantly. Ignore that Monday through Friday. This is day 1 to the last day of your lesson. You're going through these. So you're going to start at the bottom, go to the top, and then go to the bottom again. One of the things that I will say is that having the assessment ready before you start teaching is going to make a huge advantage to actually going through the lesson and knowing what you're trying to teach. So it gives you a target to aim for. And this is kind of something that's controversial. A lot of districts will hold all tests till last minute because they don't want any teachers cheating. And, unfortunately, I've never really seen it, but, I have heard stories about teachers who on all district and school tests did like 80-90% of their kids passing, and then on the state test they got like 40 or 30%. And so obviously that means they were in some way cheating, because if they were passing up here, there's no reason they shouldn't have passed on the state test level at that same exact percentage point. To me, I think at the end of the year, your kids are taking a random state test you've never seen before, so why cheat? Because it's all going to come out in the end anyway. So I think build the test with your team way ahead of time. So before you even start that unit, you want the test planned out. What does the day 12 test look like? And those tests are going to be called comprehensive, which means they cover all the expectations for that unit. But then you're going to build formative quizzes. So at the end of week 1, what short quiz are you going to give the kids to see if they mastered everything from that week? Then week 2, what formative quiz are you going to give them? Week 3, what formative quiz? Then you get to that comprehensive. If you have all of those built, then it's a good guide for you to aim towards. And even like on a very simple level, matching vocabulary words is a big deal. So in our test, they never say you. It's always in third person. How could the reader know that? Or how could the reader infer? Well, what does infer mean? Who's the reader? All of these little conversations you got to have with the kids. So having your test done ahead of time and making sure that it's weighted, it really is balanced against that state expectation or that final assessment that they're going to take at the end of the year, allows you to really plan effectively for them to meet and be successful. Also, it really helps you know that you are staying on task. It really makes sure that you are addressing what you're supposed to. And a good assessment should be used as a planning tool. And so there's nothing worse than teaching and doing really well, and then you, like I've done before with some of my friends, we last minute write a test like in 30 minutes because we're like, oh snap, we got to give a test tomorrow, and then we'll create something and it's weak, and then we have to turn these scores in, and of course my principal's like, what's going on with you? Your scores are terrible. And we're like, no, it was a bad test, my bad, like it was a bad test. So I would say have your tests done ahead of time, have them planned out, and then use them each day in class. Have that right there with you, with your little clipboard you're walking around, and use it as a guide for your teaching. Okay, so these are very perfunctory things, but these are the ones that I was talking about. So have right here the way kids turn things in. So for classes, maybe this is period 1, period 2, period 3. I actually do boxes now. On the Instagram account, I'll upload pictures of my classroom at Talking to Teachers. And you can go and see kind of what I do. But I have boxes now. I had a friend who built me all these bookshelves, which was like great because we didn't have a lot of storage in our classrooms. But you want separate papers for each content and each class you teach. So keep that in mind. This is a great thing for me. These were materials. So throughout the week, I would throw maybe Monday's materials in here, or I would throw vocabulary quizzes. Then I would throw in maybe the exit tickets. So, and these were blank ones that I could randomly pull when I needed to pass them out. So I would make all my copies and then have them organized from week to week. But I would also say it's different now. It's crazy how different things are from only a few years ago when I started teaching, because now everything's online.
do that anymore. Everything I use is through Google Quizzes, Google Classroom, the Google Forms. So, but at any rate, you want to make sure that you have a planned procedure in place. You want to make sure that your students know your planned procedure. That's what you're, so maybe day one is all about behavior expectations, and then day two is all about how work is turned into you, how it's submitted. I'm throwing on a new day this year on the first week of school, which is going to be Google Classroom training. And we're going to spend a whole day messing around with Google Classroom, going through how to access assignments, how to turn things in, how to check grades, because I'm going to go through that. I used Google Classroom all last year. I really didn't do anything paper. And when this whole thing happened, this whole shutdown happened, it was a breeze. Monday, I just started teaching. And on Monday, some teachers were barely trying to set up classrooms, trying to get a hold of kids and give them codes. I had to post several codes in my classroom because so many people were not prepared. So online is the way. It's the way of the future. Our kids are going to live in a technological world. We do them a disservice by staying paper-based. So really keep that in mind as well. But make sure that you do think about how materials are going to be turned in and where you're going to store things. Okay. Write it down. Okay, so at in our state, First Mark, the bank, very nice of them. They create these beautiful agendas for us every year that we're able to use. I would say this is a great tip. Have one place for planning your week's agendas. And that is because I've used online formats and paper-based formats and a random journal that I had and all these different things, and I've double booked so many times. And then I'm supposed to be in a parent conference or like an ARD where we go through a kid who receives special ed services, and those things are mandatory. But I also plan to meet with my principal. But then, I may have also planned a meeting with student council or NJHS. And so that's really unprofessional when you don't show up to things. So I would say do not rely on several different modes of planning. You want one thing, and that is what you're going to use. So decide, am I going to stick to a paper format? Am I going to stick to my Google calendar? Am I going to stick to just a journal that I write in every day? But whatever you choose to use, and that's kind of the theme of this, you do you, but just make sure that you do the same thing day in and day out. And so you want to make sure that you have all things in there. I would say anything from meetings to miscellaneous information. Like next week is going to be the Thanksgiving lunch. Something as silly as that, but those are types of things that it's good to remember for whatever reason. I've had the most weird circumstances where I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have wrote that down. So some days I love the Thanksgiving lunch. I'm not alone in that, by the way. A lot of teachers, we look forward that day. That day, like teachers and students are running out of the classroom like full speed, knocking each other over, trying to get to the cafeteria in time to get the pumpkin pie, like the tiny little 1-inch by 1-inch pumpkin pie with a little bit of whipped cream on top. But something else to think in mind. Okay, last one I'll say. This is something you probably will not learn at school. Well, I don't know. Schools are pretty progressive today. But this is back to that 7 habits thing. That's elementary. But you're going to want to turn off. And that's really important. And that's not something that's advocated a lot in schools. But you need to reach a day, especially as a new teacher, there's this intense sense of guilt. There's this intense sense of not doing enough and failing. Just know everyone's lying. Everyone's saying that they're doing way more than they actually are. No one went home over Thanksgiving break and Christmas break and planned anything. And so there's a weird guilt mentality that happens a lot of the time where you can feel like, oh my God, I'm not doing, oh my God, they're such hard workers. And I went through that as well. But I tell you, years in, people that I was like, oh my God, they're so effective. They're so this and that. And then one day they let their guard down. They're like, man, I didn't do anything all weekend. I just laid down and watched Netflix. So it's something important to really keep in mind for yourself. I would say there has to be a point in the evening. My first year teaching, I would get home and I would sit at my computer and plan till 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I became the most miserable person. And someone that I really respect and look up to, and she has a great amount of self-control, emotional control, and she had been a family friend for years. And she told me, I really hope you get past this point in your life because you are insufferable right now. And she's unlike that. It's not like someone who says things like that. It's someone that their words have gravity. And I realized I was so miserable. The planning, the stress, the politics, it's an intense world. It's an intense world between the adults you work with, the children you work with. And so you have to learn a day to turn off. And even on weekends, and we use the Remind app. Schools all use Remind now. And you know, some schools can be negligent, and on a Saturday at 2:00 in the afternoon, they'll send out reminds. You know, on a Sunday at 10 in the morning, they're sending out reminds, which are pieces of information, text messages that go to your phone. And to me, that's so disrespectful because it never allows you to turn off and really replenish the well. And I'll tell you what, you're a lot more effective with a full night of sleep and, you know, a little bit of relaxation than you are just stressing and stressing and stressing. And it's a thing that no one says. Everyone's always like, I wish that I had the time to just, and I wish, and it's such a lie because everyone at some point is relaxing. But especially in education, it can be a world where people are intimidated to admit that they're human. My advice to you, take a day to yourself. Don't be afraid to turn your phone off on a Saturday. Or not off, but turn off the ability for you to access school information or for people to get a hold of you, and relax. And take a deep breath. Your first year is tough. It's a long road, but year one is it. Once you get to year two, things start falling in place. And each year after that, it flies by. You know, I mean, I remember being in my second year teaching, and now I'm in the last week of my seventh year teaching, and I'm like, God, like, I don't even remember the last few years. But man, that first year, I remember vividly. I remember everything. And I've talked to teachers. I'm doing this podcast where I'm sitting down with educators, and they can recount every single moment of that first year. And so I feel for you, first year teachers. Hold out, stay strong. You are more than enough. You're doing enough. And it's going to get way better as the years go on, and you're going to laugh at like how stressed out you were. But anyways, I hope this is helpful. I know this was way too long, and thank you to like the 3 people who probably made it to the end of this video. I'm just bored at home and thought that I would do this. Have a wonderful day. Bye.